way you teach me, damn diggity, you like to sum it up. I like the way you teach me, but darn diggity, you like to sum it up. I like the way you teach me.
Hey guys, you got your next video podcast. This one's about JFK.
I like the way you teach me, but darn diggity, you like to sum it up.
We got the Bay of Pigs invasion, 1961, and Cuban Missile Crisis. Hey, how do you like my theme music? So, we're going to have a quiz on this on Blackboard, okay? And you're going to have to pay attention. You can write stuff down or not, it's up to you. But this all deals with Cuba. There's two events here. And the first one starts when Fidel Castro takes over the country in 1958, and he overthrew the current government of Cuba, which was one that we were happy with, okay? And he set up his own communist, with Soviet help, I'm sure, ruthless pro-Soviet dictatorship. And to be honest, it's still the same way. So the Bay of Pigs invasion, what's going on? Well, the name has a purpose. It's called Bay of Pigs because there's a bay that where the pigs were, I believe, shipped out of Bahia de Cochinos, I believe that's how you pronounce it. So there's a name, just like hey, Pigs Hill or Pigs Alley, and going up to Reserve, right in our own school district. Funny coincidence. So we don't like the fact that Fidel Castro is in charge of communists, and so JFK hatches a plan. Actually, no, I'm sorry, Ike Eisenhower. Ike was his nickname. President Eisenhower started the planning, but then he left office, and so JFK enters office, and the plan is already in place. It's going to happen. So I guess he could have canceled it, but he decided not to. So the plan was to take a bunch of Cuban exiles, a lot of them with military training and stuff, some military fighters, Cuban exiles that did not want Fidel Castro there. We were like, hey, well, we have the common enemy. Why don't we help each other overthrow him? And so we did. The CIA, our CIA, trained them. And the purpose was to invade Cuba, right? And we're going to help them. We're like, oh, yeah, we'll be there. Don't worry. We'll help you with supplies and airstrikes and all this good stuff. But the hope was that once people saw this happening, that it would spark this popular uprising, meaning that the masses of Cubans would help uprise against Castro, force him out of power. So in January, February, March, April 1961, 1,400 poorly trained and ill-supplied Cubans landed, these exiles we're talking about. And we weren't able to really give them the support. I think we called it off in the last minute. There's some miscommunication. Pretty much a big embarrassment. No uprising occurred, and a lot of these people were either killed or captured by the Cuban military, like the Cuban communist military. So the Soviets are loving this. They're watching from a distance. It's a huge public relations dream for them. And then they took this opportunity to arm Cuba. When Cuba asked for help, they took that opportunity to arm Cuba with a bunch of weapons, which we'll talk about here in just a second. And this, of course, causes or is known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is only one year later after all this mess. So JFK is really embarrassed. He's only been president for a few months, like I said, and this is how he starts his presidency. So he's going to earn people's trust back, but it's kind of a victory for the Soviets. So in the months after this, we're talking 6-7 months, U.S. spy planes are flying over Cuba, and they do this. They did this a lot at the time. They didn't have satellites, remember, back then. So if you wanted pictures of another country, what was going on, you had to have a spy plane way up in the sky, pretty much untraceable or unviewable, and they would take these pictures with these crazy camera lenses. So we see these missile sites in Cuba under construction, and then these analysts look at the photos with these magnifying glasses and with the film, and they're specialists that know what they're looking for, and they see these shapes, and they figure they're about 100 feet long or something, and they're like, well, you know what, that looks just like the shape and size of these Soviet missiles, these nuclear warhead missiles. And when they figured out what they were, they realized that, wow, this is bad. Cuba is our third closest neighbor, right? Mexico and Canada obviously touch our borders. Other than that, it's Cuba is the next closest. So with these different ballistic missiles that the Soviets put on Cuba's soil at Cuba's request, to protect themselves in case we ever tried to invade them again, which I must say is kind of understandable that they would feel that way. Um, Turns out that they can strike pretty much anywhere in the U.S. I've seen maps with it drawn further, even further to the northwest. So basically up to here, I've seen it drawn so that Seattle and Oregon maybe aren't covered, but everything else is up for grabs. So especially southeastern United States, East Coast, yeah, you could be hit with these missiles. This is horrifying. So once the president and his team, called XCOM or Executive Committee, they had these top secret meetings. No one knows about this other than a few people in the government. Like, man, what are we gonna do? And JFK, one of his advisors, gives him option number one, which is to bomb these missile sites and to invade Cuba. And they only wanted to do this if they knew it was before the missiles were activated, before the nuclear warheads were up and running. Because I guess this type of thing takes days or weeks. But it turns out they received word that one of them was up and running. So if we did do an invasion, they could have just sent a nuclear missile our way, and it would have been World War III, which would still be going on, I'm sure. Another option, one of his advisors said, hey, let's negotiate. But then people said, that'll drag out too much time for the Soviets. Let's not do that. Um, Another option was naval blockade. Let's let's put our foot down a little bit. Let's not let any more shipments come into Cuba, and let's punish them. I guess financially too. Now Kennedy insisted that the Soviets had to remove the missiles from Cuba. It wasn't an option of like we'll talk about things. It's that you have to remove the missiles from Cuba. What he didn't tell the American public was that we also had similar missiles in Turkey pointing at the Soviet Union. Similar situation, but hey, no one needed to know that, I guess. 180 warships involved. Our B-52 bombers with nuclear weapons are attached. They're activated. I mean, this is heightened. This is literally, people say that the closest we've ever come to nuclear warfare, where two countries, could be fighting each other with nukes. Obviously, we bombed Japan, but this is both countries would be having bombs, and it's very, very tense for these 14 days. Worldwide military forces on top alert. This is the first time the U.S. Went to DEFCON 2, and the only thing left after that is if we are at nuclear war. So we're waiting, waiting, waiting. The world isn't sure what's going to happen. And for 13 days, the US and USSR faced off in this game of nuclear chicken. So the final results are: on October 28th, 1962, the Soviets blinked, or in other words, they kind of gave in. Now, this blockade was happening. Our ships confronted Soviet ships at sea. Oh my gosh, they're going to run into each other. They're going to attack each other. What's going to happen? And you can imagine the president and all his advisors in the room listening to the reports from the the naval ships saying what's happening, what's happening, what's happening. And then all of a sudden, the Soviet ship apparently turns away and starts sailing back home. So hooray, hooray. Standoff is over. Nikita Khrushchev, the Soviet premier, his name was Nikita Khrushchev, agrees to remove the missiles from Cuba. But the other part of that deal is, oh yeah, those U.S. missiles that are in Turkey pointing at the Soviet Union, how about you remove those too? That only seems fair, doesn't it? And so we agreed, and the standoff is over. And there's this YouTube link that, if you do have a minute, if you type into Google, I'm sorry, to YouTube, Cuban Missile Crisis, 13 Days, hopefully you can find this roughly 5-minute clip from the movie, from the year 2000, I think it's from. And it's a pretty cool movie, but this clip shows how tense it was right at the end. So, hey, listen, take the quiz that's on Blackboard now and prove that you watched this. I'll try to make it worth your while to reward you for watching it. All right, thanks.